Hello everyone. I'm Penny Smith, Warden for the Municipality of the District of Shelburne, and welcome and thank you for taking the time to join us this afternoon for this webinar. This webinar is being held as part of the third round of public consultation sessions for the Municipal Planning Strategy and Land Use Bylaw, and to receive input from you to help us improve these documents. Our facilitator and planner is Crystal Fuller. She's the senior planner with Brighter Community Planning and Consulting. And as with the webinar held in November, Crystal will give a presentation and answer questions from the session chat. So again, thank you for your participation. We appreciate your questions and your constructive comments. And I'll ask Crystal to please begin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can people give a thumbs up if you can find that, or raise their hand or do something to indicate that they can hear okay and that they can see okay? Okay, I saw that one. So not hearing any concerns, I'm going to assume everyone can hear okay. Hi, my name's Crystal Fuller and I'm with Brighter Community Planning and Consulting. I've been working with the municipality, the District of Shelburne, over the last months, over a year now, to help get draft documents in place for their first ever comprehensive municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw. So what I'm going to do today is take you through where we are in the process and tell you what changes have been put in place since we last had some engagement with the public. So we're going to today introduce the key changes to the draft documents since you saw them last. So the last version of the documents we're calling version 2 or V2. The ones that are now on the website for the public's comment are version 3 or V3. So that's what I mean when I say V2 and V3. So we're now at version 3 of these documents, and the next step after this, and we'll review the timeline, is the next step is for council then to consider them for first reading. So just to go back in history a little bit, there was a lot of engagement for the end of 2023. This outlines what was done to kind of help us develop the preliminary first version or V1 and V2 of the documents. These reports, they're what we heard reports, the background studies, a report on wind turbines prepared by Stantec. They're all publicly available and you can look through them. But all of these foundational documents culminated in the first public draft, which was V2, where we had a series of engagements in really December. So just to, it seems like a longer time ago, but in November and December. This is what we did in November and December. We had a webinar on wind turbines specifically. We had 3 in-person community engagement sessions and the locations listed. We had pretty good attendance at most of them. We had good weather, so we were thankful for that. We also had face-to-face or in-person one-on-one meetings with property owners or individuals who wish to speak to myself about a particular issue. We also had a website, or not a website, a email address where people sent comments or questions or requested changes, and we received 22 emails from the public. So we took all of that and produced another what we heard report to make sure we had it right. This is publicly available again. It summarized what we heard in themes, and based on what we heard, we updated the documents to where we are now, which is V3 or version 3. We are getting very close to this being the final draft for council's consideration. I would also like to add that this round of engagement in consultation with the public was added by council after the last engagement sessions in December. So we heard an awful lot that the turnaround time for comments was too short. With the mail strike, the notifications out to individuals didn't get received, that there wasn't enough time to review documents. So this engagement session, I was going to say in January, but it's February already. These February 2 webinars, council added these to the process so that the public would have another kick at the can in terms of providing comments, but also in response to the concerns expressed by members of the public in December about how quickly the process was moving. So the feedback and changes generally fall into these categories. There's similar categories that we talked about in December. There was a lot of conversation on wind turbines, a lot of concerns for the setbacks that were being proposed in the policy approaches, though some support for actually making it easier to have wind turbines. But the majority of the comments from the people who attended really was expressing concerns about the wind turbine policies. There are questions about coastal area, the coastal areas. That hasn't significantly changed those policies, but there's some tweaking. We had a section before called economic development, but we've changed that to community development because people noted quite rightly that the document did not have enough on tourism, didn't have enough on housing, land banking, food security, a variety of those sorts of issues which really contribute to the community and are more than economic development initiatives. Some minor changes on new roads and wildfires, particularly the number of lots that can be developed, excuse me, without additional studies. There were a number of administrative issues that were raised, particularly does the municipality have the capacity to deal with bringing in a whole new bylaw? How much is this going to cost? Do staff know how to administer a bylaw such as this? And then there was something we're just calling other issues, which were just sort of issues that arose that don't fall neatly into any of these categories. So the way this is structured is I'm going to tell you what was in the V2, version 2, which was what was presented to council or to the public in December. And then I'm going to talk to you about what V3, or the version we're currently looking at, how it differs from the V2 version. So basically, in the old document, we had some regulations to direct wind turbines to certain areas that were about setback. We hadn't fully decided on a setback, though we had proposed, I forget what it was now, but maybe it was a kilometer or a kilometer and a half. I think it was a kilometer from residences. We heard the overwhelming response was that wasn't acceptable. So we reviewed this, but just so people remember, we did use this a lot to help people think about what the impact of the setbacks would be if we use setbacks, a setback distance. So this is the whole of the municipality. So just to remind you, this still is the same. You cannot put a wind turbine in any of the protected areas or the municipal watersheds. So the green and blue areas are not where you can put wind turbines. Then it remains the same. You cannot put wind turbines in the red area. So that's everything south of the 103. That's staying the same in V3 of the documents. Then we looked at the buffering. So that's if we required everything to be a minimum of a kilometer from a habitable dwelling, that's the land in the red is where you could not build a turbine. So anything colored is where you can't build a turbine based on a 1 kilometer setback. That's 1.5 kilometer setback, 2 and 2.5. So we haven't adjusted these maps. This is exactly what you saw if you were around in December. However, and these were the concerns that people have. There's a lot about health, the impact on the rural landscape, the need for decommissioning requirements, mitigation measurements, how is the community involved in the approval process, and how does the community benefit? So those were some of the really key issues that arose. So in this version, the V3 version, there's a requirement for the developer to engage with the community as part of the approval process. What we're proposing is that anything over that is 2.5 kilometers away from a habitable dwelling, not a shed or a hunting camp, but a habitable dwelling, can happen as of right, subject to specific regulations. However, if it's between 1.5 and 2.5 kilometers from a habitable dwelling, it has to go through a development agreement, and I'll walk you through what those policies would look like. If it's 1.4 kilometers away from a habitable dwelling, you cannot put a wind turbine under at least this version of the documents. There's now new requirements for decommissioning, and we always had requirements for community benefits previously, but that remains in there. So this is what the changes at a high level to how we're doing it. So I'm just going to repeat this because I know it's a key concern for many. Just by permit, you can go 2.5 kilometers. You can come in and get a permit if you meet the requirements. 1.5 to 2.5 kilometers from a habitable dwelling, you need to go by a development agreement, which has a lot more detail in it. A development agreement is a contract that involves the public and ultimately council approval, and it's appealable to the Utility and Review Board. So the development agreement has embedded in that process public engagement, whereas in a development permit, you do not have to do public engagement to the same extent. So here's the draft policy for you to take a look at. If those of you with your documents in front of you, you can look at policy 5.2.2, large scale wind turbines. So the criteria is that the wind proponent provides documentation confirming it has engaged with the local community and how any concerns have been addressed. Now that may seem vague, and it is, but that will have to be to the satisfaction of council when they approve the development agreement. So at a minimum, council can determine and provide direction on what that engagement looks like, but it should be at the very least be notification and some meetings with affected property owners in the area. It will require a decommissioning plan that commits to removing turbine infrastructure within 1 year after operations have ceased. You have to have a site plan that demonstrates adequate access points, buffering turbine locations relative to the habitable dwellings, wetlands and water course locations. And it can't be any closer than 2 times the height of the turbine to the property line on which the turbine is located. And it also requires the environmental assessment approval be completed before the development agreement is executed, and then some general policies which are used for all development agreements. And the policy around the social benefits fund, there is a requirement for a social benefit agreement as a condition of large-scale wind turbines. And what will be included in that will be probably a further discussion with council about what they want to see, what the standards are for that, and may even depend on the scale of the large-scale wind turbine. So if it's a small wind farm, as opposed to a larger wind farm, should the community benefits be larger and the ability to ask for more. So council will have to do some more work on that, but it sets the stage for those discussions. So coastal hazard. So coastal areas are at risk in Nova Scotia. I think everybody's talked about that. And the policy directions are here. Basically, if you're within the coastal area as defined by the province on their mapping, which is the best mapping we have at this time, you're pretty limited in what you can do. You can have small structures, and there's some exemptions to allow certain things to happen. That doesn't mean your whole lot is unavailable for development, but it does mean that the areas that have been identified as at risk are not developable except in certain limited circumstances. So the concerns expressed from the public are restrictions on development rights. Some people bought properties thinking they were developable and now they're not, or may not be. Negative impact, and people expressed concerns about the impacts on property values and the costs of getting the necessary studies to build within those areas. Talking about what is the appropriate mitigation to the risk of being on the coast. There's some with questions about who a qualified professional is, because some of the studies have to be done by qualified professionals, and how is inland flooding addressed. So those are some of the concerns we heard. So the delineation of the coastal area has not changed. It is still the same as what was in the original documents. Questions regarding about who a qualified professional is, that will be determined by the development officer. So it depends what it is. The word qualified professionals is a common word used in many places. It usually is somebody with a professional designation, like an engineer. It could be a watercourse delineator that has their certification and training from the province. It could be a civil engineer. It could be a survey if you're looking for certain elevations. So the qualified professionals will be determined by the development officer at that time based on appropriate factors. And I would suggest that is the right way to go, especially in a rural area. The DL may decide that the that the qualified professional is somebody who knows the area really, really well and has, and so it'll be up to the applicant who's bringing in the report to say, this is my qualified professional, and it will be determined if that's acceptable. Pre-existing structures. So people were concerned that their house that was in there would not be permitted, and they are. Rebuilding of damaged structures. So if something washes away, it's permitted. I think the way we've done it, and I'm not sure the slide is quite right, if it's a permitted use, then you can rebuild. The question is, if your property is destroyed on the coast and it washes away, do you really want to rebuild in that particular location? And impact on development rights. Now that's, again, it is a land use planning issue, but there are certain lots that and properties that will have their development rights limited. And that is the intention. It is to reduce the number of buildings built in areas that are at risk of coastal erosion and extreme storm events. So my apologies for that. That shouldn't say that. It is a land use planning issue. The property values, though, are not a land use planning issue. So council does not consider, nor can it, the impact on people's individual property values. That is outside of the scope of municipal planning. So I think that's what that box is getting at. So in terms of this community development, previously we were looking at the future industrial lands, denser housing, and what we call the suburban areas. We're looking at special planning areas, and there's 2 of them that was designed to have flexible uses and how to best utilize municipal infrastructure. So that was what was in V2. Some of the things we heard was about a rationale for special planning areas. No heritage protection and policies, which was absolutely true. We didn't have that in there. Lack of tourism policies, we've added that. Lack of policies addressing housing, homelessness, and food security. So that has been addressed. No regulations for solar farms. We are adding that. And more regulations for hydro plants, which we have done. So as mentioned, there's the heritage. We've added these things and more of a rationale for the special planning areas. So we've added, so if you look into your documents, if you have them in front of you, sort of the policy 3.4s have a lot of these new policies. And you can take a look at those. A lot of them are just sort of, they may not seem like they're important because they don't do anything in and of themselves, but these policies help council when they're considering other developments, about if they're going to be approved or not. They create the sort of framework or the platform on which council will make other decisions, even though they don't directly do anything. They actually do something. There is something in there about promoting housing and encouraging a diversity of housing options within the suburban designation. So the suburban designation is that designation around the towns of Shelburne and Lockport, where it makes sense for there to be a bit more density. And it talks about affordable housing projects to be and where there can be located. And the council will pursue partnerships with neighboring municipalities and nonprofits in order to have a variety of housing forms that are more affordable for more people. There's also a new policy about affordable housing outside the suburban designation by development agreement. So let's say a nonprofit or a community group wants to put something bigger than a single unit dwelling on a piece of land. That technically wouldn't be allowed in the land use bylaw, but does it make sense? So we have allowed some flexibility so that especially the affordable housing projects that may have land or acquire land can be considered outside of that suburban area. And these are the policies. I'm not going to go through them in detail, but the policies are meant to ensure that they are somewhat close to town and not way out in the middle of nowhere, but provide some flexibility for when there's suitable land for these projects to occur. We talk about homeless and alternative forms. So if there's sometimes you think that there's only apartment buildings or single unit dwellings, but sometimes there's an alternative housing form that a community group or developer or an individual wants to try out that doesn't meet our bylaws. We've allowed some flexibility there so that council can consider those. And this is sort of the policy around this the special the SPA overlay, the special planning areas. So it's important to understand that there's two of these, and it's about if the proposal brings significant economic development opportunities to the region and is supported by municipal studies or strategies. So it can't be just sort of just something that pops out of the air. It has to be something that aligns with what the municipality sees as a benefit to the broader community through documentation that supports it. And that there's air, noise, and visual impacts to adjacent residential dwellings. So there's the impact to what's around it is considered. So whether or not it's a big box store or it's a large museum or cultural center, or it's whatever the municipality has determined is in the best interest. If the use requires an environmental assessment, that occur. So that would be things like large scale energy projects, for example. And I want to be clear because I've seen this and I've asked the municipality, there is no project on the books. There is no hydrogen facility that's knocking at the door that's asked. There's no oil company. There's no large scale industry. It's just simply giving council the tools to develop economic industries in these areas if something seems viable and is consistent with the community with the community and economic development planning. There was a great deal of concern that there was something that was not transparent about this process. By having it as part of a development agreement, there will be community engagement, public engagement. It will be appealable to the Utility and Review Board. Council will have to make their decisions in public, and there's opportunities for the public to influence that decision. And written right into the policy is that a public engagement process to involve a variety of stakeholders is conducted. And that would be conducted so that everybody has an opportunity to be involved in it in a meaningful way. And also if it's an intensive use, that it allows for a traffic study if appropriate. Not all uses require a traffic study. There are certain standards that apply, but if it's felt like if it's from a technical perspective, if a traffic study is warranted, this gives the ability to request that. So the municipality has expressed interest in hydrogen in terms of interest being, if something comes to the municipality, how would that be regulated? What would that look like? So this would be by development agreement only. These standards are taken from a national set of guidelines for minimum guidelines for uh, facilities that are related to uh, nitrogen and hydrogen facilities. I can't for the life of me just remember what they are, but if somebody's interested, just send an email to the Plan Shelburne email account, and we can send you the link to it so you can see it. It's not allowed to be within a coastal hazard area, and it has to demonstrate environmental protection measures, site suitability, emergency response, and a monitoring program. So this picture is not an example of something that's coming to Shelburne. It is simply what is happening down in Port of Hawkesbury. So that picture is just to give you a sense of the Everwind project down there. So I just want to be perfectly clear. This is not a project under consideration by Shelburne. It is just simply a picture of a hydrogen plant that's already in Nova Scotia. And just for folks' information, which municipality is Richmond, allows this as of right. This is not what's being suggested here. This is being suggested by development agreement, which involves the applicant meeting a number of criteria and a public process. And there is no application pending. There's no project that's currently being considered or under discussions with the municipality. That has been made clear to me. Also in this document, we have identified what's called a service boundary. It's not where services currently are, but it is an area which identifies where services may be extended into in the future pending a whole technical studies and money. The reason this is important to put here is it puts a constraint on where density and growth can happen. And so it allows for consideration of more intensive development in these locations within the service boundary if and when services are extended. So it's not a plan for anything today, but it sets the course for the future where if the municipality grows, that where services may be installed. Services can't be installed outside of this boundary unless there's an extension to it. And right now, services don't go to most of this. So this is just setting the table for 20 or 30 years from now. So in the old documents, the V2, there was some restrictions on new roads and really relating to wildfires, where it limits new public roads. There's private roads by development agreement, require emergency evacuation routes for subdivisions creating more than 2 units. That has been increased into the V3 documents up to 4 units. So we heard concerns about recreational camps. So what I would call hunting camps, the costs and standards for private roads, the costs for new public roads, and concerns about limiting development. So there's an approach for, again, what I call in my world a hunting camp, but a recreational camp, and how they can occur by deeded access and can't be rented or for commercial usage, private roads, and we reduced the area of the suburban designation. So if you remember, in the original version, we had a whole bunch of these pink areas, which is where more density can go. But upon reflection and from the wisdom of the public, we certainly heard and believe that there were too many of these areas. This level of growth is probably not warranted. So they have been removed from the map. And now we just have sort of around Shelburne and a little bit around Lockport. Happy to sort of further refine that, and council may, but we thought it was important to remove much of that. So in terms of administration and other issues, there was really concerns about, and we talked about these, just the municipality not having the capacity and the processes in place. And there was also some concerns about how adjacent municipalities were going to be notified of any of these development proposals. So the municipality is working on planning procedures and enforcement and processes, and that the town of Shelburne and particularly, and the municipality are talking about how they're going to do notification to each other about their processes. Those are all generally not included in a municipal planning strategy document. They will be outside of it, but I think the point is well taken from the public. This is an administrative, a change in the administrative burden that rests on the municipality, and they've got to get ready for it and plan for it. So here's the timeline for most recently. So we had the engagements on V2. We talked about all the stuff that went on before that to kind of get to that first public draft. We're now having a webinar today, and there's another tomorrow on this version. The intention is to revise it based on additional comment from the public. As part of this process, we're also having meetings with individuals who want to talk specifically about particular concerns to do mostly probably with their properties. So we're doing those on Friday. So if you want to be on that list, please email us at the Plan Shelburne email address. The intention is we're aiming to do first reading in March. So council will get the final draft. Council will decide what it's going to do at that point, but either as presented or maybe with a few changes, they will then forward it to a public hearing and second reading, slated generally for April, maybe May. And then the ministerial review will be over the summer, could be as late as the fall of 2025. And please note that the first reading, the public hearing, second reading, and ministerial review are all subject to council decision making, and they can stop the process or change the process or send it back for more thinking at any time. So thank you for attending today. I see that there's 26 participants here, so that's great attendance. We're having another one of these tomorrow night, which will be a repeat. So here's the email address for you. And if you have any comments, we don't have a date, but we'd like to have all comments, and we've already been receiving some, by the end of next week. So that date is February 21st. February 21st at the latest. For your comments, we are going to, after this engagement, we will do another very short what we heard report summarizing the comments and outlining any changes we're making to the document, which will go accompany the final drafts to council for first reading, hopefully in March. So with that, Pamela, I'm going to turn it over to you. And Pamela's from the Brighter Community Planning team. So maybe Pamela, turn on your screen. Will facilitate and start taking questions. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, and I'll do my best to answer them.
Five questions in Q&As.
Hey.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. So we have some questions in the Q&A. I see that there's also questions in the chat box. So I'm going to start in the Q&A, and then I'll go through the chat and see if I can pull out those questions as well. But if you have some questions coming up, if you could put them in the Q&A box, that would be great. So Crystal, I have a question from Frank Suku, and if I pronounce your name wrong, I do apologize. His question is, with respect to wind turbines, was there any data presented on the net energy produced by the wind turbine over its lifetime versus the energy required to produce the wind turbine? For example, if the energy cost for building and deploying a wind turbine is 100 and the energy generated by a turbine over its lifetime is 80, then overall this is a negative. What was this type of analysis done?
So it's not the role of the municipality to determine if a wind turbine is a good source of energy. That's not the role of the municipality. Generally, work is being done at the provincial level through the Department of Energy and the folks there. So there is no assessment of the value or importance or strengths or weaknesses of any kind of energy production. This is not dealing with how energy is produced at all. It's simply dealing with if there is a proposal for a wind turbine or a new substation or all those sorts of things, right? how the municipality will regulate them from a land use perspective. So if it's a really interesting discussion to discuss how we produce our energy in Nova Scotia, but that is not the discussion that we're having as part of this land use bylaw municipal planning strategy. So to your answer, absolutely no, none of that work was done and no thinking was put into it. And nor will it be, and it's not generally done by municipalities in Nova Scotia.
Thank you. The next question is, what is the maximum permissible size of wind turbines in the municipality of the District of Shelburne?
Well, right, under the current bylaws, I wouldn't want to guess, but there is no maximum size. There's no maximum size here. There's no limit to it. I think there's practical limits and there's probably regulatory, issues through the environmental assessment process, how much the grid can absorb and the transmission lines. I think but in terms of the land use planning, the only constraint would be, can they be within the setbacks from the municipality, and can they meet all the policies I just outlined in the development agreement? And so we can go back to those if you'd like and review those. My apologies for scrolling through. It kind of makes people motion sick, but so these are the policies against which any large-scale wind turbine between 1.5 and 2.5 kilometers will be evaluated. So there's no maximum number of turbines, for example.
Sorry, just 1 second here. We have a question. Can you confirm that parks, tourism, and trails are permitted, not requiring a development, I think it's supposed to be development permit when vested from another public authority as stated in Land Use Bylaw Part 5, Section 27?
Yeah, so the development of trails doesn't require a development permit. What was the other ones? Public parks. If there's structures and buildings on it, then it would require a permit for those. But if somebody's going to turn something into like a public park or something, if it was a campground. So generally speaking, if there was the Nova Scotia Nature Trust put in a conservation easement and created a naturalized environment, that wouldn't require a permit, for example.
Does Section 10 allow development of cottage or campsites or even other recreational facilities alongside managed trails?
Section 10, maybe that person can tell me section 10 of the land use bylaw or the municipal planning strategy. Oops, sorry. So repeat that question again, Pamela, sorry.
Yeah, no, sorry, I'm just gonna find it back here. Does Section 10 allow development of cottage or campsites or even other recreational facilities alongside managed trails?
So, we'd have to dig into that a little bit more, and I'm not sure where we are talking about in the land use bylaw. Just let me quickly, and maybe Ning, you can see if you can figure out what is being referred to there.
That will be on page 23.
Of the land use bylaw?
Yes.
Sorry, guys.
So recreational camps so if you look at the definition of a recreational camp is, that's really intended to getting that issue of hunting camps. So the definition of a recreational camp, and I almost called it a hunting camp, but I didn't end up doing that. You just bear with me for a second. Means a detached structure, 1-story maximum in height, used for public recreation uses and designed in such a manner that the structure can be used on a year-round basis and shall not be construed as a dwelling unit as defined elsewhere. So a recreational camp, depending on its size, may require a permit. But if we go back to, what page was that again?
23?
23.
Yeah. Section 6 and 10.
will requires deeded access, a power supply shall be limited to off-grid systems, and hunting camps shall not be rented, leased, or used for commercial purposes. So I think there's a variety of scenarios that could work for folks, but generally there's going to have to be a permit if they're a certain size. But the intention is to keep these camps so that they don't turn into residential dwellings. So sometimes, you probably know of people who had an old cottage that they've had in the family, and the next thing you know, somebody buys it or somebody passes away and they put a couple $100,000 into it and it turns into a permanent home. And the intention is to allow people to have recreational usage, particularly hunting camps or camps in the woods, but to make it clear that those are not single unit dwellings and will not be permitted as such and will not be for permanent occupation.
I have another question, Crystal. Wind turbines and hydrogen plants and regulations have been noted, but solar energy has not been discussed in any detail. Could the municipality offer any support for individuals to take on their own sustainability on energy? Also, was there any planning on a solar farm, and how would that be accommodated and regulated?
We did note that we didn't have anything for solar farms, and there is something in the document, so maybe Ning, you could find where that reference is. It's hard to look and talk at the same time. In terms of supporting individual homeowners, I know some municipalities that have done that to support a solar program, but I can't speak to whether or not the municipality here is planning on doing that or may do that. And has the solar panel section been found?
I think Ning's just looking now.
Yeah, it's there. We did add something to the new, the version 3 bylaws, and that was somebody asked that question reasonably recently, and we said, yeah, that's a good point. So there is something, and when we find it, I'll loop back to it. So maybe go on to the next question while we're looking for that.
Sure thing. Back to the trails, there are tourism entrepreneurs that wish to build facilities along the trail. What do they need to do to build such facilities, such as a B&B?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. So they'd have to have road frontage. They'd have to, so there's no process right now to allow commercial, larger scale commercial, like a B&B or a restaurant along those trails. Should it be considered? Potentially. I can think of ways we could do that, but at this point we hadn't considered that for a larger scale. Not when I say larger scale, I mean like a small restaurant. And it does make some sense because I know in HRM they have I forget the name of the little snack tea house that used to be along the rail trail just outside sort of Tantall and Timberley, and it was very popular. So, but there would have to be parking and access and those sorts of things. So something to consider, but I'd be interested to know more about what somebody's thinking and can it be accommodated? So I think that's probably more of an individual question. So whoever asked that, if you'd like to sit down and have a conversation, we can do that.
Okay, I have another question. Does the LUB Part 523.6 preclude existing home occupations on private roads when states may only be on public street or road? I'll start there.
So 523. So we're in the land use bylaw.
Yeah, it says Part 5, 23.6.
Oh, 23.6.
Sorry, I misspoke.
Clearly planners don't number things to make it easily understandable, but it works in my brain. So yeah, the requirements for home occupations are there. So office, main residential, no outdoor equipment. So a new home occupation is located on a public street or a road. So a new home occupation must be on a public street or a road.
So not a private road?
Not a private road.
And then the second part of that, also, may any new homes be built in existing older subdivisions prior to 2020, by the looks of it, that has no developer to submit a development agreement without the private road being upgraded for emergency vehicle turnaround and evacuation route beyond existing single entrance.
So I think there's a lot to unpack in that one. So that would be, I would say, a specific situation. So again, this would be one that if you have a situation you want to talk through, then we can do that. But generally speaking, the intention is not to encourage more development on these private roads, especially when there's, you know, not somebody kind of coordinating the future growth of it. So if there's a specific situation, we can, you know, look at it, but generally speaking, the intention is not to encourage that kind of development. Now, if there's an existing lot created, there's some existing lot provisions, but we'd have to look at the specific of that situation. So I'd encourage that person who asked that question to set up a meeting with me on Friday and we can look at it more closely.
Okay. And Ning is referencing about the solar power. So it's in the MPS policy 5.2.3 on page 28. Permitting solar facilities within any zone subject to the requirements of the land use bylaw.
Yeah, so we were probably looking for the LUB requirements. That just sets it up. So the answer is small scale wind turbines can occur, and I forget how wind farms. So we'll, again, let me, I would send that as a question to us, and I can respond to that, but right off the top of my head, I can't find it. We literally added that last week or the week before, so I don't know where that reference is. So we'll have to take a look.
Okay. If Ning finds it, we can put it in the chat as well.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. Norman says 5.2.2 large scale turbines. The setbacks suggested are for 660-foot turbines. The next generation may be even higher at over 800 feet. There is no accommodation for setbacks for the next generation of turbines. Please advise.
Right, so you have to be 2 times the height from the property line. So regardless of the height, if it's 1,000 feet or 2,000 feet or 3,000 feet, you know, and I'm getting ridiculous there, there's still the setback from the property line, but the overall setback from habitable properties, that 1.5 to 2.5 does not anticipate or understand fully even where wind turbine and those heights. So the 1.5 was is larger than some municipalities, probably larger than many municipalities, with the recent decision coming on wind turbines from the West Hants decision. So West Hants had 2.5 kilometer setback, and the province, when they reviewed the MPS, did not support that and made changes. So these documents have been forwarded to the province for their comment on the wind turbine possibilities, but the 1.5 and 2 to 2.5 by development agreement would allow for project specific considerations, and that's where they could start looking at things like the height. But at this point, we think we have a reasonable approach that responds to the need for an increased setback, which in the version 2 was 1 kilometer. So we've increased it to 1.5, and in the version 2 it was by as of right. This requires it by development agreement and mandatory public engagement, and then anything over 2.5 is as of right. And again, in the V2, it was 1 kilometer, anything as of right. So this is responding to it without going further than may be possible upon review by the province.
Thank you. In the work that you've done so far, have you found an example of a municipality that has done an excellent job with their land use bylaws with respect to wind turbines? And if yes, then which municipality would that be?
You know, I would hesitate to make a public judgment of people's land use bylaws and other professional work. So there's been many of the rurals, not many of the sort of smaller towns have anything on wind turbines, and there's a plethora of ways. Some do it as of right, some not many, many by development agreements. Setbacks vary, considerations vary, public benefits vary. So yeah, I'm probably not going to comment on that. Nova Scotia's municipalities have chosen different paths on this one.
Okay. I have a comment here. The maintenance of current fire roads created during the last wildfires need to be adopted by somebody, the municipality or the DNR.
Yeah, again, not really within, I would encourage, that's not something we would consider as part of this process. However, I think we have, I know Val Keen from the municipalities on this webinar, and Val, maybe you could take note of that and consider it, but it's not really a planning issue.
Sorry, Crystal. There was another comment of somewhere to add that a fire break of 250 meters must be created and maintained around any wind infrastructure or fall zone.
Yeah, I don't have any comment on that.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just looking through.
And I don't want to be dismissive of that last comment. I've worked on both sides of wind projects and I've not heard that before. It could be true, could not be true, but that's why you often leave these, a lot of those detailed regulatory issues to the environmental assessment who has requirements. If there are regulations like that, that's great. They're not municipal regulations, and so that's why I don't have any comment on it, because it's not something that would be necessarily not something that the municipality would have expertise in, and it's likely done through the environmental assessment or some other process that I'm not aware of. But again, I have a pretty good understanding of the wind process, and it's the first I've heard of that, but it could be true. And thanks for sharing that, and we'll take a look at it. And whoever that is, if you have any information on that, please shoot us an email, and I'd love to see it.
Okay, Krista, sorry, I'm just going through the chat because there were some questions here earlier. I'm just double checking to make sure that I didn't miss anything. There are some comments about some of the wording, but I'm going to leave that for us to review after the
So just maybe, Pamela, on that, if you have questions about wording or the lack of clarity, thank you so much for sharing that. I love detail-oriented people who look at those things. We will be looking at all the comments and continuing to refine that. So just because we don't specifically acknowledge that, it doesn't mean that we aren't going to look at it closely. And the municipalities will also be aware of some of these as well. So, or all of these.
Thanks, Crystal, for clarifying. There is one comment here. I just lost it. I'm sorry. It was about, I believe it was about the coastal part of the presentation, saying how can you determine if something has been 75% destroyed? Isn't this up to the insurance company?
Yeah, so that's often left to the determination that's actually right now in the Municipal Government Act for non-conforming uses. So if it's non-conforming and it's not somebody's home, if it's destroyed by 75%, then you can't rebuild if it's non-conforming. So I think most of the uses that are in that zone are considered permitted, but just in case your use is made non-conforming, then that 75% rule is applied. And usually that's where you come back to the qualified person. So usually it's depending on what it is, it could be, insurers, as somebody who I just had a house fire a few months ago, I'm well aware of insurance companies. But normally you would get something like a structural engineer to determine if it's 75% burnt. Would the insurance determination be part of that? Perhaps, but normally insurers lean on structural engineers or architects or some similar kind of professional to help them make their determination.
Crystal,
Mhm.
could you speak and clarify on the council's decision-making process between sort of the first reading and the, did you say second hearing? Public
Second
hearing?
reading, the public hearing.
Thank
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a great question. So that's my phone talking, sorry. So once council gives first reading, there is a requirement for an advertisement for the public hearing. Once that advertisement occurs, it's important for the public to understand that no development can occur that's contrary to the documents that have received first reading. So it's important to move forward with the public hearing and for council to consider second reading fairly quickly, because essentially the documents not enforced, but you can't issue any permits contrary to it. So council gives first reading, which basically means that they want to hear from the public in a formal way. They advertise it, and then the public hearing has to be advertised for two clear weeks. That usually takes 3 or 4 by the time the ads happen and the notification happens. Then there can be changes in the document between first reading and second reading. So if there's, a clear gap that we missed something, or council says at the first reading, we want this changed in the document that goes forward to public hearing, we can do that between first reading and public hearing. Once it's at the public hearing and the public has that document and has started to comment on it, that document cannot be substantially changed and is the document the council has to consider at second reading. And then at second reading, council either approves it, rejects it. They can sit on it for a little while, meaning that they can, consider it. They can make minor tweaks, which are really quite minor. But if there is a major change at second reading, it has to go back and another public hearing has to be held. So generally speaking, the document should be pretty much set at the public hearing stage.
Crystal, can I just, Val had messaged me that March 3rd is the final comments date.
Okay, sorry, thanks, March 3rd. Sorry to rush people, March 3rd.
I think that if anybody has any further questions, if you want to put them in the question and answer box, just give a moment if you want.
Just while that's happening, so let's just repeat that March 3rd date. We'll put that in our presentation for tomorrow night so that that's clear. We will be making changes starting immediately, final changes to get a final draft for council to consider. So we are coming towards the end of the process, or sort of the beginning of the end, I guess is what it is, into the formal adoption process, which is the next stage. So I encourage people to send emails, to reach out, and to provide their comments before that March 3rd date, and we will take a look at everything that comes into us. So Pamela, maybe I'll just go back to again, sorry to scroll on the screen. That is the email address. That's also the email address you use to set up a one-on-one meeting. It'll be an online meeting for Friday.
Nobody has added any more, Crystal, to
All
the
right.
questions.
So maybe I'll turn it over to Warden Smith if you'd like to give thanks and have any final wrap-up comments. I'm happy to stop talking.
Thank you, Crystal. Yeah, just to say thank you again for everyone for their input, for being with us this afternoon. It's extremely, extremely important that we hear from you. Crystal has given you the information again, the contact information. And if there are any other questions or comments, please do reach out. And again, we have one more webinar, and that will be tomorrow evening at 6. So thanks again for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.